Okay, I'll call the Special Regional Council meeting to order. Please be advised that today's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually and is being streamed and recorded. Today I have a Mayor's Edition. On behalf of the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, we send our most sincere condolences to the Kamloops, to Tukwin First Nations, our neighboring First Nations and Indigenous communities across Canada, further to the discovery of the burial site of hundreds of children at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School grounds. This news is a profound reminder of the unthinkable tragedies experienced by Canada's Indigenous people and is yet another call to find the truth through the dark history of residential schools in our communities. For those families whose children were taken and never returned, and for those who survived to have seen the effects throughout their generations, we acknowledge our duty to do better and support reconciliation efforts to bring about necessary changes in our society today. We hope these young souls can be returned to their communities to be properly remembered and laid to rest among their families who have gone before them. Let me get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda today. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Carried. Staff Sergeant Fletcher. The annual detachment priorities. Would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Foster. Sorry, my phone ringing here. So I just want to also say thank you for your comments about the residential school finding in Kamloops. I mean, that hits us all pretty close to home. My wife and kids are Indigenous in British Columbia, and we've had some pretty tough conversations at home about imagining, you know, our kids being in that circumstance and the trauma they went through, and knowing family members that attended residential school and the hardship to this day they still face. You're right. There's a lot that needs to be done as a society moving forward for reconciliation, and yeah, thank you for those comments.
Well, thank you, Staff Sergeant. I'll do we have Staff Sergeant Fletcher on screen, or can you activate your video, Staff Sergeant? Is that possible?
Yeah, I can try here. Just a second here. This is a government phone, so I may not do what I want it to do here.
Well, if you're not able to, that's okay. I want to do introductions here, and I was unable to see you, so, but sure. I will go around the table with Councillor Gerwing.
I can see you.
Councillor Todd Penny. Councillor John Roper. You know our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Barry, our Deputy CAO, Aaron Laval, and our Corporate Manager, Ms. McIver.
Thank you. And just so to clarify, I'm just a sergeant, no staff sergeant. I just fill in the shoes right now.
Okay. So we didn't mind giving you a promotion right here. I mean, that's.
Well, I know, hey, that sounded all right to me, but I'm sure my bosses weren't on board with that. So I'll talk about our annual performance plan, but I'll just also give council just a little bit of an update for this year, being 2021, and just kind of the current situation the detachment is in and the workload that we're dealing with. It has been a fairly busy year so far. We've seen an increase of 19% in our detachment file load compared to this time last year. And that's an increase of 35% compared to this time in 2019. Currently, we're sitting at today about 1,377 calls just for the Fort Nelson and area, including Profit and FNFN and then up the highway. So saying that, as you guys have probably, well, you are obviously aware, it's been a little bit, we've had some significant investigations here in the past couple months. I'd also like just to say thank you to the city formally for accommodating North District Major Crime when they were up here in April conducting their investigation into a murder of Mr. Gardner. By accommodating and providing space for these investigators to work, it helped tremendously. As you guys are aware, our local detachment and including the traffic office, we just don't have the physical space inside to accommodate that many police officers that were here to conduct that investigation. And by using the City Hall boardroom there, that offered great success for them to be able to work out of. I can't comment too much on that investigation. It is belonging to North District Major Crime out of Prince George right now. What I can say though is that the investigation is well in hand and that it is still obviously an active investigation. As things move forward, we will share with the city, the regional municipality, any updates. At that same time, we also had the unfortunate fatal car accident near Liard involving an American couple. Out of that, though, there was a lot of highlight of success with our newly acquired victim services worker and also in partnership with the fire department. I actually interviewed the driver of that vehicle at the hospital once he arrived by helicopter. And it was a great relief to him to have both the fire department and our victim services working together to find him accommodations and some resources to help get him home and figure out what he needed to do moving forward and connecting with the coroner service and the consulate. But it was just it was the first time I've seen, and it was the first time our victim services worker being new to the role here in town. She's worked previous jobs with victim services in Alberta, but it was great to see that instant working relationship, and it just highlights the strength of our partnerships between the regional municipality and the RCMP and our other community resources are. It's a great thing to see. That file is also still under investigation and now has BC Highway Patrol has conducted that. Our current staffing levels, so Staff Sergeant Ealing is away. He's been away since the beginning of this year, if you weren't aware, for personal reasons. We don't know when he is coming back, so he's off for an indeterminate amount of time. Since then, and I will continue to be acting in his position as until we hear word back of when Mike's coming back to the office. My current role here usually is the operations NCO, so I'm in charge of basically the day-to-day policing of the detachment area. Currently, we also have one vacant corporal position. So the one corporal that I do have remaining, Corporal Kyle Petrie, is also helping out with my substantive role in the operations end of things. We also have several members away due to parental leave. 2 have recently resigned, and we have 1 upcoming for a pending transfer. So needless to say, we have some staffing issues, but that's kind of the status quo across the board in the province. I don't know when any of these members will be replaced or backfilled. Due to COVID, our training facility was closed down for a period of time. And even then we weren't meeting our targets for replacements. So we could in our area expect longer than usual vacancies. But saying that though, we do have adequate resources right now with the way we've conducted scheduling that it should not affect policing services. Moving on to the annual performance plan For those of you, I'm sure everybody here is aware of the annual performance plan, but just in case you are not, every detachment is required to develop this plan. The plan usually encompasses priorities of the community, division, detachment, and the organization. So it's kind of a guiding document, a guiding plan that looks at many different layers. This plan is approved by district management, and I have to report on it throughout the year, the fiscal year, on how the detachment is meeting its targets. So there's nothing really here that is too earth-shattering. I think I'll read out what our priorities are. These priorities were the same as last year with some little tweaks to them, but I still think they're very relevant to what we're dealing with today. And then at the end, I'll open the floor to any questions or suggestions or anything like that that council would like to input. So the first, crime and victimization, that's our first priority, specifically in regards to domestic violence and mental health. Since the beginning of this year, being January 1st, our detachment has investigated 29 domestics, and so violence in relationships. That's up from 15 last year at the same time. So we've seen that uptick. I don't think there's one particular reason why we would. I mean, we'd be foolish to dismiss COVID and some of the stresses that has put on families, especially with employment and then quarantining rules and not being able to see family. There's a lot of layers that a lot of these public health orders have put in place. We continue to be actively engaged with our ICAT, which is basically a team approach to high-risk domestic violence, including probation, Crown, and community partners, in identifying some alternatives to try to prevent the violence from continuing. Our new victim services worker is actively engaged in every one of these files if a referral is accepted. And she'll be working with them and has been working with victims on developing meaningful safety plans and also linking them to resources. And those resources could be counseling to real estate to, whatever is custom tailored to that situation to ultimately get the victim out of a bad situation and get them on their feet. She also will continue to, along with us, working with the Crown Prosecution Service and identifying high-risk domestic violence cases and applying the new, there is new legislation. I won't get into it, but making it a little bit tougher for people that have been convicted of domestic violence in the past, of domestic violence related offenses, making it more difficult for them to achieve bail. And this ultimately supports the protection of the victim. Of note on the mental health side of things, we've seen actually a 50% increase in mental health related calls from this time last year. This year, we've had so far 61 Mental Health Act apprehensions. So, I mean, that is, we're seeing kind of a mix of people in regular residents in town having some issues, but also we've had quite a few transient people coming to Fort Nelson for various reasons that have been a draw on resources, and maybe we're connected with the services a larger center would offer, and aren't able to access that same level of care being in a smaller community. We continue to work with Northern Health. We are still making the IPT referrals which is our way of making a mental health referral to Northern Health so they can do follow-up. So a lot of it has to be a partnership with the hospital and with Northern Health. And we are working towards that, but that again, we've seen that increase. The next priority is that being traffic safety. This is a priority that is also more or less mandated from the division. So I want to speak about traffic safety. A lot of people interpret traffic safety as, now I can't speak for BC Highway Patrol, but my detachment, I can speak about my detachment. It's not a quota going out there and writing tickets, and it's about the priority for what I expect from this detachment and the membership is the reduction in impaired drivers. I want our focus to be on impaired drivers. Now, obviously we have to uphold the Motor Vehicle Act, but we know that impaired driving, whether it be by drug or alcohol, is a serious risk, and it's a safety concern for motorists, pedestrians, and everybody in our community. To date, we've had, so this is from January 1st, we've had 24 immediate roadside prohibitions. Those are people that have blown a fail on the roadside screening device, which results in a 30-day vehicle impound, a 90-day driving prohibition, and a $500 fine just to start. We've also had 3 immediate roadside prohibitions that were a 3-day. So this is under the Motor Vehicle Act. There's a fine attached to that. That's for somebody that blows under the 0.08, but between 0.05 and 0.08 is the best way to describe it. But we have also had 2 impaired investigations by drug. One is still under investigation, and that one was involving a commercial vehicle. So moving forward, my expectation on the traffic safety end of things is to have continued proactive efforts to detect impaired drivers and to take these guys off the road. It's a small enough town. People can walk, find a cab. I mean, in a small town, we do have cab services. Call for a ride. There's no excuse. And I will say though that the fatal that occurred up on the highway near Liard in April, we do not believe impairment was a factor. So I just want to clarify that in case anybody was wondering. And our last priority would be crime reduction, and specifically with prolific offenders. I'm sure we all can agree drug and property crime go hand in hand. We often see that nexus of thefts and break and enters to homes and businesses is often related to drug use and paying for that habit. Not all the time, but I'd say a large majority of the time. So what we are working on right now and what we are doing right now is targeted enforcement and coordination with our partner agencies in regards to social repeat offenders. So this includes working with probation, specifically probation, and also our neighboring detachments in identifying who our prolific offenders are, and then also coming up with a plan to try to reduce their negative behavior and impact on our community. This also includes liaising with our mental health partners because often there's an underlying mental health and addiction component that if we don't try to get them on board with that, we're not going to see success as long as that drug addiction is there. Saying that, we've had a slight increase in property crime, that being break and enters. I'm just trying to pull up my stat here. My window closed on me. So it's not it's not a major increase. We're talking, I think it was about 10 files difference from last year. Likely, a lot of those reports are at the hands of a group of individuals, the same individuals. So we have some things on the go here, and hopefully we'll see some success, and then we should see a reduction in that property crime. Kind of the other issue that we're having that we're working on is we're getting reports of break and enters, but there are victims, being the property owners, don't necessarily want to cooperate and go to court for different reasons. So it's kind of a two-part. We need their cooperation in order to be successful on the enforcement end. But that is something that we're cognizant of and trying to mitigate that the best we can to get their cooperation for whatever's their roadblock in the way. We've seen 83. This sounds large, but I mean, stats are like, it is a big increase. This was last year, an 83% increase in mischief-related files. And this was in 2020. Now, I've reviewed a lot of that data. Now, mischief can be property crime, but it can also be disturbances within a household, because causing a disturbance under the criminal code can only happen in a public place. So part of the criminal code for mischief is if you're causing a disturbance in a home, that's the applicable offense we go with. Now, these aren't necessarily charges, but they're people that have been arrested. A lot of it has been caused by the COVID-19 protocols with people being quarantined into their homes. We've had, some issues where people that aren't usually quarantined together are not getting along, and with substance abuse, and creates the perfect storm. So we've seen that increase. I don't think there's anything really that can be done differently. We have to allow the PHO to kind of work its way out here in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I believe as we see life get back to normal, which we are starting to go down that road, I'm hoping those numbers will level out, but that's something that we're going to keep an eye on. As far as drugs, so I've talked about the prolific offender part, but with the drug part, as you guys are aware, we did have one death related to a fentanyl overdose of a young person in town. This was earlier in the year. That file and the information that we've derived from there is being used to help us with future investigations. It is very sad. There's the reality today with the drugs that we're seeing is that fentanyl can really be in anything. It's not always being used at the same time as an opioid, such as heroin. We've seen fentanyl with a stimulant, such as methamphetamine. We've seen fentanyl in marijuana, and it's not always intentional, but because of how small of a particulate that can cause you to overdose, there's also often cross-contamination with other drugs, and people are ingesting fentanyl, sometimes not knowingly. Other times there is people that choose to use fentanyl specifically. So we can't forget about that either. Very, very risky business. So as we move forward here, we have been establishing information sharing with neighboring detachments, but also with our provincial tactical enforcement priority. PTEP is an organization, provincial organization that includes all the RCMP, municipal detachments, CFSEU, which is our Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit that deals with organized crime. And we have a monthly meeting now where this information, local information and knowledge is shared and then evaluated and could be used in the bigger picture of things as well for success. that is something, and we can also, I should also say that as we move forward with projects and initiatives, there is funding that we can apply for through PTIP and CFSCU and resources that we can draw upon. And we are, without getting into details, we are working and have a couple of different projects on the go right now that I'm hoping we will see some success. So those are our priorities. I'll just go over again. That's crime and victimization, specifically related to domestic violence and mental health, traffic safety, specifically impaired drivers, and crime reduction, dealing with our prolific offenders. If anybody has any questions, or input, I'd be happy to take that now.
Okay, Sergeant Fletcher, I guess maybe what we should do is start with the beginning, the crime and victimization, the domestic violence and mental health issues. Are there any councillors who want to ask any questions on that first topic? Okay, I'll start then, Sergeant Fletcher. Of the domestic violence incidents in Fort Nelson in this year, the first 5 months, and how many of those cases, first of all, were there, and how many were charges laid?
So currently right now we're at 29. And out of that, I can't give you an exact number of how many charges were forwarded because some of them are still under investigation and haven't been forwarded to the Crown yet. I can say though, with domestic violence, our discretion on not forwarding a Crown is more or less non-existent. If there is evidence to suggest that an offense has occurred, whether or not the victim is cooperative, we will forward the file to Crown Counsel for consideration.
Okay, and what's the success rate? Like once you forward that to Crown Counsel with your investigation, then is it up to Crown Counsel whether to go forward with the charges?
Yeah, it is. It's completely up to Crown Counsel. We submit the file in its entirety, including statements, pictures, whatever, full disclosure to Crown Counsel. The prosecution service then has its charge approval criteria, which often relies upon likelihood of conviction and a bunch of other variables that they look at. So they look at it through a different lens, but I don't know what our success rate is. I would say it's quite high. And the reason why I would say that is I'm very impressed with the quality of work that is being forwarded to Crown, really going over the evidence very clearly, but also the work that we have putting into supporting our victims. Sometimes our victims are not cooperative or unable to cooperate for various different reasons at the beginning of the investigation, but by linking them with victim services and having continued follow-ups, sometimes we've had success, more often than not have had success in getting them into a position where now they're able to cooperate, provide a statement, and be able to take the stand, which then ultimately increases our chances of charge approval. It's dynamic. Every situation's different. It's and especially with domestic violence related files, they're very sensitive, and sometimes they take some time to come together. But that is a priority of ours, is supporting our victims, because often we see success when our victims are in a good position. They are able to be on board and have the supports they need.
Okay, my experience with the domestic violence issues are, the police go there, they investigate the crime, they forward this to Crown Counsel or the prosecution service, and even when the prosecution service decides to go ahead with charges, sometimes they're not successful because the victim doesn't want to testify, or for one reason or another. And even if there is a conviction, quite often you find the same two people back together again in a domestic situation, and the the situation repeats. And I don't know if that's been your experience or you've seen these repeat offenders with the same victim, same perpetrator, going through the criminal justice system again and again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that I've seen and that we see across the board, across the country. And that's why as we identify these high-risk domestics, and it doesn't necessarily mean a level of a rating of how bad the violence was, but repetitive behavior and that cycle of violence that is often referred to, which is very real, is referring with that ICAT team and linking our partnerships, and then hopefully trying to find the right thing to break that cycle. The courts may not always be the answer. Maybe drug and alcohol, maybe the Ministry of Children and Families being involved to a degree, or a combination of all the above, we can see success. So these teams work together and work with a specific couple and try to find the best solution. So yeah, because of that, we do see, and are we always successful? No, but we have to give it our best shot and continue to give it our best shot.
So by bringing in the judicial system and the counseling, et cetera, and looking for better outcomes, whether it is a reduction in drug and alcohol abuse to achieve those goals, is great. But what I worry about is that we don't actually see the numbers dropping, and that's somewhat of a concern.
It is, and I mean, if I had the magic answer, if anything, it would be ideal if people just got out of the relationship and ended it when it started to become poor, before there was violence. But that's not always easy for everybody. There's a lot of factors at play that prevent a victim from being able to leave a relationship, whether that's children, financial dependency. The list can go on. It's different for everybody. But because of the new legislation, specifically around Bill C-75, that's an issue that's been identified across the country that with domestic violence and trying to break that cycle. Without going into the great detail of it, but there is new provisions in the criminal code that basically put an accused on reverse onus when it comes to a bail hearing if they have been convicted of a previous domestic violence related offense. It does not matter if it's the same partner or not. And by reverse onus means that the judge will detain them in custody prior to trial unless they are able to convince the judge otherwise. So it puts a stricter onus onto accused who are seeking bail. That also there is now new sentencing considerations to be taken in regards to if it's a domestic violence case, and also if the victim is of a minority group, including Indigenous. So the judge needs to take that in consideration upon sentencing as well. It's new. We're still seeing how it's playing out, and only time will tell if there will be a documented success.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions regarding domestic violence? Hearing none, I guess we'll move on to traffic, specifically impaired driving and other serious driving offenses. Now, you mentioned impaired driving. How many charges were laid in the past 5 months for over 0.08?
So for charges, so we'll include the immediate roadside prohibition, which is although it's not a criminal charge, it's an administrative motor vehicle act. We've had 24 since January 1st. And also and we've had 2 files of impaired by drug, and those are still before the courts.
So of the 24, you say that most of these are administrative rather than criminal code offenses?
Yeah, it's the same criteria. It's just that the investigator has an option to either go by way of criminal code, a criminal charge, or if they can go by way of this immediate roadside prohibition, which was introduced by the province. I think we're about 11 years ago now. So the criteria for an immediate roadside prohibition is that the person has not had an impaired conviction in the previous 5 years, including they have not had a similar IRP in the past 5 years. It's not a crash that resulted in the injury of somebody. It's for the person that more or less is pulled over at a check stop or is pulled over on the road and has been determined through an investigation to be impaired. So there is some criteria. It's up to the investigator to make a decision whether they want to go by way of criminal or roadside prohibition. The preference, if we can, is to do the immediate roadside prohibition. That meaning that the idea behind it was it alleviated some court time. There is an appeal process for an individual that gets it. It doesn't go through court, it goes through Road Safety BC, and there's an adjudicator that will hear their appeal and make a decision of whether it stands or not. But it also just takes less manpower. As you know, a criminal code, like I'm an instructor for impaired investigations, including the roadside screening devices. I'm also a breath technician designated by the province. A criminal code investigation for impaired driving generally can tie up a police officer, for up to 24 hours, including the reporting and also court time. Where an immediate roadside prohibition, I'm only maybe allocating 2 to 3 hours of man hours to get through that file. So that's the idea in BC, and other provinces have followed suit. But of those 24, they've all blown a fail, which indicates to the investigator roadside on the roadside screening device that their blood alcohol content is over 0.08. So they are criminal under the criminal code. They meet that criteria, but the investigator has chose to go by way of administrative sanctions with the immediate roadside prohibition.
In the course of the previous 5 months, how many traffic accidents have been alcohol related? I mean, aside from the roadside suspensions, traffic accidents, are there any that are alcohol related?
I don't have that right in front of me right now, so I can't give you an exact number, but I know that definitely one was related or suspected to be related to a drug, not alcohol, but a drug.
What I'm trying to do is get a handle here on the seriousness of the impaired driver in our society, to determine how large a danger they are. So what I'm looking for, I guess, is some statistics to show impaired driving, damage to society, I guess, through impaired driving. And I suppose those statistics are not compiled, eh?
Well, they are compiled. I can find them for you. They're compiled by Road Safety BC and also the RCB. I just don't have those numbers in front of me to officially give you.
Okay. So, but anyway, the majority of the accidents that are happening in the Northern Rockies are not alcohol or drug related. Would be a fair statement.
Yeah, I believe that's a fair statement. There's other factors at play. You know, whether it's winter road conditions and experienced drivers. No, we don't have. You know, I don't think we're any different than any other community with the amount of impaired driving collisions, but there's the potential.
I guess, Sergeant Fletcher, we see on TV sometimes where there's been some catastrophic events that have happened after somebody has been impaired, and the vehicle goes out of control and kills several people, and that's So I was just trying to get an idea here of our impaired driving problem within the municipality, but I think you've cleared that up for me. Are there any questions for Sergeant Fletcher on traffic? Mr. Penny.
Actually, if you don't mind, there's a couple things I'd like to talk to him about.
Sure.
To kind of together. Councillor Todd Penny here, and first off, I'd like to start off by saying how much I appreciate what you and all your members do, and appreciate the extra load that's put on yourself and your corporal here to keep up with being absent staff sergeant right now. I wanted to pass on some concerns. I've had quite a few residents come see me at my place of business over the last several months, and complaints or worries that they have with policing in our area, and a lot of them have been related to either traffic or the drugs and the mischief crime or theft that you referred to earlier. And with the traffic, I really appreciate actually how much effort has gone in with the impaired investigations in our area. I really appreciate. There's one member in particular that seems to be the one that I see most often up by Tim Hortons, just randomly checking people, which I really appreciate, because different times of the day and week, and it keeps people on guard, so they don't take that chance and give it a try. But where the real complaints have come in is when we see spotting scopes set up on either end of town, trying to catch that one guy that pulled out of somewhere and decided to put it in drive before he put the seatbelt, clicked the seatbelt in, or took a sip of coffee or that sort of thing. And I understand that you still need to uphold the traffic laws and that sort of thing, but it seems to most residents that it was taken a little bit too far by, like I said, having that spotting scope set up on one end of town or the other and picking up these infractions when we feel that, and I say we because I agree with the residents that have come to speak to me, we find that there's a lot of crime when it comes to drugs and thefts and that sort of thing in the community that could probably be better served by the man hours that were spent behind the camera. So I don't really know how you can respond to that, but just I wanted to make sure that the concerns that the residents have brought to me and my concerns as well were brought to you. So.
Yeah, fair enough. I understand where you're coming from there. Those operations that you see on the road, that's BC Highway Patrol, or formerly Traffic Services, which have a completely different mandate and priorities than my detachment. My detachments, with the resources that we have, would find a difficult time finding a proactive time to sit with the spotting scope. It's that is a mandate that Traffic Services has. They're going through BC Highway Patrol, as they've been renamed this month. That is their mandate, and I have no say on how that unit is operating. But any concerns that people have with that unit can be brought up. There is a new corporal here, Bradley Savage, has just moved up this month and is now in charge of he's the supervisor of the unit out of Fort Nelson.
Thank you very much. I guess we Mr. Savage.
I think Sergeant Fletcher, everybody wants to see our traffic laws enforced. It's just that there's a certain level of Mickey Mouse which we don't want to see. So, and I think that's what Councillor Penny is referring to, and what I've heard from some members of the public from time to time about traffic charges being a little bit petty. Certainly, we don't want people exceeding the speed limit. We want them to drive safely in school zones and not drink alcohol when they're on the roadways. But some of the stories that I've heard, and I have no idea of whether or not these stories are true or not, And sometimes you're only getting one side of a story, but we do want to make sure that they're not too, as I say, Mickey Mouse. Moving on, I'm going to talk about crime reduction here. I've had several complaints from the public here about, well, first of all, illicit drug trafficking. There's been some people in town who have been trafficking in narcotics and have been doing so for 10 years without a single charge against them, and that's very concerning to a lot of residents. Some of these people may not have jobs, but they seem to be doing all right financially, and that's a little bit of a concern to the public as well. And these are not, these are people who are well known within the public, and you know, we'd like to see a little bit more enforcement here of the drug laws. Realize, of course, that you can't make a charge materialize out of thin air, and it takes a great deal of work, but I know this is some of the concerns of the public. So did you want to comment on that, Staff Sergeant Fletcher?
Yeah, so I understand that, and there is the issue that we run into with a lot of our drug investigations. I mean, we can sit at the table here and name off, you know, everybody that we suspect, and I'm sure we have the same list. But in order to get our charge approval through Federal Crown, the Public Prosecution Service, they go through the same motions where they have a charge approval criteria. The issue that we run into is reluctance in witnesses into providing statements. So we try to be as proactive as we can, using different investigative techniques, but also the increased information sharing which we have established. I'm hoping we'll see some success, you know, because Fort Nelson is very well linked to Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, Grand Prairie, and also up north into the Yukon. Now, saying that, you know, we do have one file. You know, I'm not going to get into the specifics, but is before the courts right now with a Fort Nelson resident, including some drug trafficking. I can't comment on the investigation or anything like that until we, because it is before the courts. We also have a few other targets that are investigations that I should say are well underway. My hope is that as we move forward here, with the resources that I have, I'm trying to prioritize and juggle some resources a bit to specifically target drug dealers in town, not just in town, but in our area. And we hope we'll see some success, especially linking in some of our other units out of Prince George and Fort St. John. You know, and as that happens, I would like to see, you know, we can look at media releases and that kind of thing to advise the community that we are taking those steps and that we are having some success. As we continue forward, though, I mean, at the end of the day, that does not replace witnesses coming forward and giving information. You know, there is opportunities. I mean, we can't get into the specifics of it, but there is ways people can remain anonymous, and those are different avenues that we're looking at. But it's just a matter of, you know, getting people talking on the enforcement end of things, but also, you know, there's also other ways around reducing drug dealing activities. A lot of that comes under the Motor Vehicle Act. Some of that comes under different various pieces of legislation where we make it uncomfortable for them to conduct business in town.
Any and all of those things I think would be quite helpful in the community. And I know a lot of people have brought up the fact that the RCMP don't always have 24-hour coverage in our community, which leaves a window of opportunity for people to move drugs between Fort St. John and Fort Nelson, and that is quite a concern, as well as a concern with a lot of break and enters that have gone on in the municipality. And you know, we see sometimes video of people who have committed crimes, and then there seems to be a great deal of time lag between that and the actual laying of charges, which is a bit of a concern as well.
Yeah, there is. I mean, like, each file is is specific and or different, I should say, then sometimes the video is not always enough. Other times it's waiting for other pieces of evidence to fall into place so that we are sending a file to Crown Counsel that has all the evidence that we need to ensure that we get that charge approval. We don't want to be premature and send a file forward that's not going to go anywhere. I'm kind of speaking broadly here, but the other thing too to keep in mind is our charge approval process can sometimes take months. So the file can be submitted to Crown Counsel for review, and really at the end of the day, there is no timeline, like a set date that they'll get back to us by. So sometimes we don't see charges approved for quite some time.
The other thing I noticed is that, the members maybe are not as good as they should be at getting back to the victims of some of these break and enters to tell them where the file is sitting and why it's sitting there. And perhaps in the future, when there is a break and enter or something like this, where there's a victim, they could be a little bit more proactive about getting back to the victim. And I know that, they can't always tell people where confidential things about the investigation. But I think it's important to bring to the victim's attention that it is ongoing, it is being worked on, and it is at a certain stage, and that the victim hasn't been forgotten.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. So part of my mandate to my supervisors, my one corporal, and I have a constable acting in that role, is that when they're conducting file reviews, they ensure that's being done, but also tasking our victim services worker with reaching out. And because she can also provide updates on the file, court process. So we're cognizant of that, and that's always been a priority. It sometimes falls off when the workload increases. I could have a police officer with 30 to 40 active investigations just for themselves. It's not an excuse. So that's why we try to incorporate victim services in our supervisor review to ensure that continues. So it's not always perfect, and we're definitely trying to increase that and get that compliance, because it is a policy of ours, of the RCMP, to communicate with our complainants and victims and keep them apprised of the investigation.
Councillor Penny?
Just to get back to one thing that the mayor just of a statement. Do we have 24-hour coverage? Like I do realize that there's somebody on duty, but do we have any vehicles that just drive around the community, in the wee hours of the morning, 7 days a week?
We do not have 24-hour on-duty policing coverage. That is a beyond me decision that was made as far as resources go. We do always have police officers on call. There's been some issues with our members, whether they get called out or not. There's a whole process with that, where when a complainant calls in, it actually goes to an inspector down in Vancouver, believe it or not, that makes a decision if the police officer should be called out or if the file that was been called in should be held until day shift starts in the morning. Now, our nighttime coverage does go into the early hours of the morning. Our on-call status is not that large. I don't it varies. We've tried with we're on a newer schedule right now to increase our night shifts. Basically with the end time of our night shifts, and we've also increased, or our day shifts are starting earlier. So we're trying to get the best coverage we can with the resources that we have available. It's not perfect. I mean, I've worked in 24-hour policing detachments to smaller detachments than this that are almost primarily on call. It's not ideal. I understand that we all understand that it's those early hours in the morning where a lot of this behavior is occurring. So what we also try to do is stagger shifts in order to have those proactive patrols being conducted at those peak times. And we also work, just to also clarify that, we also work with our crime analyst out of Prince George, who's a civilian employee. The crime analyst analyzes each town's calls for service, crime trends, and they share that information with us. We take that into consideration as well when trying to develop a shift schedule that covers off our peak periods.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Roper.
Yeah, just in regards to the murder investigation and the loss of a cherished community member, is the public in any form of danger right now? I know we can't, there's not a lot that could be said about it as it's ongoing, but is the public in danger? Is this an isolated incident? Is there anything that we should, that the public should be aware of, any precautions that the public should be taking right now?
Yeah, so even I don't know the nitty gritty, as this is in the major crimes realm, but I do know, I can confidently say that this is a isolated incident. We don't believe that this is something that shares the same trend as what we saw up the highway in 2019. You know, if there was a risk, a measured risk to the public, major crime, and through our detachment would be putting out some sort of precautions and media release to the community. But I don't think, you know, I can say that we don't believe that the general public as a whole right now is at any risk. You know, as far as precautions go, I mean, you know, I wouldn't suggest anything different than what people should be doing anyways. You know, by staying safe, you know, knowing where you're going and that kind of, or letting others know where you're going, you know, all the regular things that we teach our kids how to be safe. But I don't think there's anything specifically different that I can suggest.
Councillor Roper.
Just to follow up, what kind of information are you looking for from the public to aid in the investigation right now?
Information that we're looking for and we are receiving, I should mention that as well, is any tips from witnesses or people that have knowledge of what occurred. People have been reaching out, and that information is then promptly shared with major crime, who then follows up and evaluates the tips received. I can say that the community's been really great in this instance at providing meaningful information, and that is definitely helping further their investigation.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions for Sergeant Fletcher? Very well, hearing none, I will thank Sergeant Fletcher for his time today, and we appreciate you coming forward to give us that update, Sergeant Fletcher. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and take care, guys. Stay safe.
Administration report number 34, appointment of Acting Director of Finance, Tony Pike. Mr. Berry, did you want to speak to this?
Sure, Mayor. Just in the absence of with Ryan's departure, we have Tony, of course, is going to step in and assist in the role, and as part of the staff appointments occurring that typically occur annually. Of course, Tony's not on that list currently, so at getting council resolution to appoint Tony an acting director of finance.
I'll make that motion that Tony Pike be appointed acting director of finance. Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried. Administration report number 35, electoral areas reform impacts. I'll move that MLA Davies be advised that the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality shares his concerns with the proposed Bill 7, having the electoral boundaries largely based on population is a disservice to the diverse and broad geographic regions of the province, such as the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality, which provides the bulk of the natural resources which drive the economy of the province of British Columbia. The proposed language in Bill 7, which states that the Commission may take into account special considerations respecting demographic and geographic factors, does not adequately ensure that geographic and demographic considerations of regions such as the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality are represented effectively in matters that impact all British Columbians. Is there any debate on this? Very well, I'll ask for a seconder for that motion. Seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Carried. This concludes the business of the Special Regional Council meeting. We are adjourned.